Hello everybody, it's Walter, your favorite historian, educator, professor, and social studies extraordinaire, here today to give you a brief lecture about a very important yet very often overlooked figure in African American history, Jonathan Jasper Wright, America's first African American appellate court judge. As a man with heavy interest in the law and politics, as you already know, and someone who once had judicial aspirations himself, this video is of special importance to me. So long before you had William H. Hastie or Thurgood Marshall, there was Jonathan Jasper Wright. Jonathan Jasper Wright was the very first African American in American history to serve as an appellate court judge. All right, a very distinguished honor, ladies and gentlemen. As you may or may not be aware, appellate judges, especially those in the states, typically have the final say on the meaning of the law in their states, all right, unless overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, all right. And Wright was the very first African American to serve in that capacity. And he opened the door for blacks to serve in the state courts at that level for the future, even though it was a very long time before you had another African American to serve as an appellate judge in a state court. Nonetheless, Wright proved that it was possible. Sadly, he is not a very well-known figure in African American history, or more importantly, American history as a whole. But that doesn't mean he is insignificant by any stretch of the imagination or just a mere footnote. His story is one which requires the researcher to go beyond Wikipedia or the first few pages of Black history books and look further, past the more commonly known Black figures of the past, the ones we've all heard of, all right? So Jonathan Jasper Wright was born a free man in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania on the 11th of February, 1840. And as a young man, his family would move to Montrose, PA, and he attended school in the wintertime and worked as a farm laborer for the rest of the year. He attended college at Lancastrian University in Ithaca, New York. And after he returned home, he would earn his law degree at the former Avery College in Pittsburgh, PA. He began working for a local law firm and would read law for 2 years and also taught to support himself. Afterwards, he worked for a judge, the Honorable John Collins in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and continued to read law for another year before applying for admission to the Pennsylvania bar. Due to the racial prejudices at that time, the Board of Law Examiners refused to even give him the time of day, yet he would not be defeated. So in the closing days of the American Civil War, roughly around April 1865, he was sent to Beaufort, South Carolina to serve as an educator and a laborer to the new freedmen of the state, all right? This was by way of the American Missionary Society. On passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which forbade various types of discrimination against African Americans, he returned to Pennsylvania and demanded that he be examined for bar membership. Not surprisingly, he was admitted without objection and became the very first African American licensed to practice law in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania on the 13th of August, 1865. All right. The following year, April of 1866, General Oliver Otis Howard, who was the director of the Freedmen's Bureau, requested that Wright be his legal advisor to him and to the freedmen in South Carolina. So with this role, he became the first black person to be able to legally practice law in the state of South Carolina. These achievements are stacking up, aren't they? All right. So in South Carolina's Constitutional Convention of 1868, he was selected as a delegate and played a tremendous role in adopting that Constitution's judiciary article. Also that year, which was the very first election in South Carolina history where African Americans could vote, he was elected a state senator from Beaufort County. He and 9 other black men became the state's first black public officials in South Carolina history. In February of 1870, a vacancy arose on the state Supreme Court, And both Wright, a state senator, and William Whipper, another African American who was a state representative, sought that seat. Ultimately, Wright was elected by the state legislature to fill that vacancy, becoming the first African American to serve as an appellate court judge in American history, and thus the first African American as well to serve on the Supreme Court of South Carolina and in the South Carolina judiciary as a whole. During his 7 years on the court, Justice Wright would author some 87 opinions on numerous issues in state law. His opinions reflected a clear mastery of the common law and legal procedure. Though viewed as controversial at the time, some of his decisions were more based on pragmatism than progress, all right? And, excuse me, some viewed his opinions as backing away from the legal principles he had championed as a delegate to the Constitutional Convention in 1868. In a very notable case in February 1877, Ex parte Norris, the court's 2-1 decision with Wright in dissent essentially validated Democrat Wade Hampton's claim to the governorship. At this point, we are nearing the end of Reconstruction. His dissent gained him the mortal contempt of the now Democratic-dominated state legislature. And in May of 1877, they passed a resolution to investigate him. We know where this is going. So desperate was that committee investigating him to find some dirt, all right, that they fabricated a story that he had accepted a bribe to dissent in Ex parte Norris, which was, of course, untrue. No evidence has ever been found to support that claim. They soon presented a huge tall tale calling for impeachment, citing that he was guilty of drunken behavior. This, too, was entirely false, but nonetheless, Justice Wright saw the writing on the wall and tendered his resignation from the court later that year. All right. No longer a judge, he moved to Charleston, South Carolina, and opened up a private law practice and taught classes from his office. All right. He would also establish the law department at Claflin College and serve as one of the college's trustees. Okay. On February 18th, 1885, Justice Wright passed away due to tuberculosis at the tender age of 45, having just turned 45 years of age about a week earlier. For many years after his death, there were great attempts made to essentially erase his legacy, erase the man from history altogether, which is why you hear very little about him when you hear about very important black figures. It would not be until 1997, all right, 112 years after his death, when a portrait of Wright was unveiled at the Supreme Court of South Carolina. And in 2022, a granite grave marker for the justice was unveiled as well. So, though Justice Wright arguably did open the door for other African Americans to serve at the appellate level on state courts, interestingly enough, though not surprising, it would be almost a century before another black person would serve on a state Supreme Court of any kind. And that individual was Justice Otis Smith to the Supreme Court of Michigan in 1861. So the dynamic journey of Justice Jonathan Jasper Wright has thus more than earned him a formidable place in black history and, more importantly, in American history. He was a groundbreaker in the legal profession for African Americans, becoming the first black person admitted to practice law in both Pennsylvania and in South Carolina, and the first African American to serve as an appellate judge in American history, the first African American to serve on the state Supreme Court of South Carolina, and the first to serve as a judge in any capacity in the state of South Carolina. So this man is a formidable person in black history, and it is sad and tragic, in my humble opinion, that he is not just as well known as Thurgood Marshall, who, of course, was the first African American to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court, all right, or William H. Hastie, who was the first African American to serve as a federal judge on one of the U.S. Courts of Appeals, all right. Justice Wright's history is secure, and his place has already been determined as formidable, groundbreaking, and phenomenal, all right, and more needs to be known about this truly great man, this far-reaching man in black history. So I thank you, and more importantly, in American history. So I thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned a thing or two. Continue to learn, teach each other. Stay safe out there, and I will talk to you at the next video. Professor Shelton, out.